All right. Hello. My name is Maurice, and this is the Alpha 3 episode of The Science Show with Mo. Today I'm here with Andrew.
Calling yourself Mo?
Yeah, I'm calling myself Mo right now.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm still trying to get the naming and all that other stuff down.
Okay.
But Andrew is here in North America because I've been, if you haven't noticed, in the other two shows, I started off in the Midwest. Then the last episode was the United States. Now he's in North America somewhere. I don't know where. Can't really tell. But anyway.
Sounds right. Yeah.
So, we're just going to go ahead and start off this interview. What is your field of study?
Well, I studied microbiology, and specifically medical microbiology, which focuses on human pathogens primarily. Although not exclusively. There's also plenty of animal pathogens out there, and those have a big economic and social impact. So one of the big ones in a lot of places is, I think, hoof and mouth disease.
Right.
And that one, it only affects animals, but if you're some farmer out in Patagonia somewhere and half of your herd dies, you might not have dinner this month.
That seems like that might be a really important thing to look into.
Yeah, so medical microbiology, mostly pathogens of people, but also some on animals.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how exactly did you get into that field? Because that's not something that I would have necessarily known about.
I took some classes, and I liked the classes in that area, so I took more classes in that area.
Okay.
And that is my thrilling origin story.
Other people have had worse, and in all honesty, I'd probably rank that in like the 75 to 80th percentile in terms of stories, so that works.
All right.
So, you start taking a bunch of classes, you liked where things were going. What was the moment that really made you say, all right, I'm 100% going to stick with this?
I don't think I ever really had one of those. There was never like an epiphany or anything. It was a thing that was going pretty well, and I said, I'll continue with it.
That works?
I don't trust that certainty that people sometimes claim to get. And some of them undoubtedly are telling the truth about it, but I suspect that they're not really listening to their doubts.
That's actually kind of important now that you said that. I haven't really thought about that. Who says?
Well, you got to be careful with your doubts because, yes, they can help you, but they can also hinder you.
Right. Very true. I said, but you got to keep. Well, yeah. I was about to say, because if you just kind of force through it, you miss all the other side stuff that would have either stopped you from going into a really bad route or would have stopped you from doing something a little bit better.
Yep.
Got to keep your options open.
Yep.
So, all right.
Always a bit of a gamble.
Right. Well, I guess moving on a little bit, what do you want? I really have to work into my question segments. I think I need to probably put some of those things on my actual screen.
I feel like your placement of that, I think you'd be better off if you could either have it out there or on your screen wouldn't be as bad.
Right.
Or at least on this side so that you're not looking off camera.
Good point.
Although you're still on camera, so people can see what you're looking at, I guess.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But I guess back to the interview, I guess, a little bit. Mm-hmm. What do you want people to know about your field? Like any particular subject or any particular topic that you can think of?
Well, there's a lot of interesting stuff with it. It's got a huge impact on human life. There are a couple of things that I would, as basically a public service, want people to know.
Okay.
One is the difference between bacterial infections and viral infections.
There's a big difference.
There's a big difference. For anybody who doesn't know, A bacteria is a little tiny cell, and it multiplies and makes more bacteria and can do bad things. A virus, on the other hand, is a little bit of protein with some either DNA or RNA in it.
Right.
And it's structurally different, it's metabolically different. It can make you sick very similarly, but they're entirely different organisms.
Right.
Where this is important is we've got all sorts of antibiotics, and antibiotics are great,
Yeah.
but they are not going to do a thing for viruses.
Right.
Because viruses work entirely differently. You can't poison them because they just sort of sit there when they're not in a cell.
Right.
Whereas bacteria, you can poison them. And that's basically what antibiotics are. They're poisons that are hopefully specifically targeted at bacterial cells.
Right.
So it's really important that if you've got a viral infection, you don't go to your doctor and yell at them until they give you antibiotics. Because A, it's not going to help you.
Right.
And B, it's going to increase the possibility that we're going to develop more antibiotic resistance. And
Right.
antibiotic resistance is really, really bad. We've made great strides in public health over the last 100 years because actually it's more like 70 years, I think, because we've got antibiotics.
Right.
People aren't dying of pneumonia nearly as much. People aren't dying of all sorts of things.
Right.
If we get widespread antibiotic resistance, you're going to die from a lot more stuff. There's going to be a lot more things out there that can kill you.
Right.
And if we manage our antibiotics properly, we can at least minimize that.
Right.
So don't go to your doctor and make them give you antibiotics for your viral infection.
Right.
And they should be able to tell you if it's a viral infection or a bacterial infection. And if they don't know, sometimes they'll give you antibiotics anyway. If your doctor says take the antibiotics, take the antibiotics.
Right. Yeah. Actually, when you started talking about the difference between a bacteria and a virus, it reminded me of like my freshman 1 bio class, where we actually, for a while, had a discussion about whether or not viruses were alive or whether or not they weren't.
Well, it's a valid question.
Yeah.
By a lot of definitions, they aren't, but they are DNA-based things or RNA-based things that exist in a protein shell. I think that what most people will say is the reason that they shouldn't be counted as living is that they don't perform their own metabolism.
Oh, okay.
But whether or not you want to include that as this is a hard and fast rule for things being alive or not, kind of up to you.
Okay.
Alive is not a good term. It's not like something is square or round. It's a spectrum. So
Right.
there's a whole range of things that you can say. Well, this much of this is alive. Are your hair follicles alive? They're made out of cells. No, they're made out of protein. They're keratin. The follicles themselves have a lot of cells in them, and they're alive.
Right.
But
Your hair itself wouldn't be alive, going by that idea.
right, and it's not. But it is made out of protein, and it does sometimes have metabolic byproducts in it.
Right.
So, yeah, it gets fuzzy. Hair's not a great example. Prions, which I hope to talk about a little bit later,
Okay.
they're actually a better example of something that's even more on the line between alive and not alive.
Yeah. I remember you talking a little bit about that earlier, and that idea kind of, I don't know how I feel about it, because the first time I actually saw anything involving prions was in a game where you're supposed to infect the entire world.
Okay.
And when I saw that, I was like, I don't know what this is. What's going on with these? I mean, I know what a bacterial infection is. I know what a viral infection is. I know what some of these other things are. But what is this, and why does this make me a little more paranoid about this now?
Yeah. No, prions are one of the things that they are something that we've somebody knew about them a very long time ago. Some guy who was doing very specific research, undoubtedly. But they've only come to the fore relatively recently, in the last 30 years. The big ones that people are aware of, the big prion diseases, locally, we've got chronic wasting disease in deer.
Okay.
That's a prion disease. You have the mad cow disease. That's the most famous one. That's a prion disease. And there's one in humans that's relatively well known. I believe it's Creutzfeldt von Yakov or something.
I feel like
I've never heard anybody who actually knows how to pronounce that. So, don't take my pronunciation of that as definitely true.
Okay.
And those are all prion diseases, and those are all prion diseases in the brain. Now, there's more than one explanation for that. You could say that there are prion diseases all over the place and we haven't found them yet. I don't know if that's the case. And when I say I don't know if that's the case, I don't mean somebody's saying this and I don't believe them. I'm saying this is information I do not have.
Okay.
The other explanation is that the brain is actually largely protected from the immune system.
Right.
So main two places in your body that your immune system don't get to are your eyes and your brain. And there's good reason for that, because sometimes if your immune system gets into your eyes or brain, it finds something it thinks is an enemy and then attacks your eyes or brain and blinds or kills you.
Right.
And that does happen to people sometimes. The downside of not having your immune system in your eyes and brain is that you can get stuff in there that won't get cleared out. So it could be that you get prion diseases in the brain because there's nothing in there cleaning it out.
Right.
Same thing with the eyes, but I've never heard of any prion diseases in the eyes.
Okay.
Now, a prion is actually just a protein. Usually they are what we call misfolded proteins. So if you're familiar with what proteins are, they're long strings of amino acids, and because of the chemical structure of the amino acids, where you've got different functional groups, what attracts, what repels,
Right.
How rigid they are, they fold.
Right.
And they fold up into little balls or all sorts of other shapes.
Right.
And prions are usually called misfolded proteins. And they're only misfolded in the sense that we know what they're usually supposed to look like, and they don't look like that.
Right.
The problem with them is that, proteins misfold all the time. You get one little mutation, and you get the wrong amino acid, and the thing that's supposed to look like this ends up looking like this.
Right.
That happens probably all the time. The problem with prions is that they are self-replicating. So you have your protein that's folded up into this weird shape, and it runs into another protein that's folded up into the normal shape. It will actually convert the normal protein into the misfolded shape.
Oh.
And that protein will then go off and do the same thing to any other proteins it runs into.
Okay.
And that will build up over time and can cause diseases.
That is a really interesting concept.
Yeah. No, it's outside of the normal disease idea that you have a living thing or a sort of living thing. If we're going to call things living or not living, I'd say that bacteria are definitely living.
Right.
Viruses are maybe sort of living. Prions are less living than viruses. Prions do not have their own DNA or RNA. They're just sort of proteins. They just sort of sit there. But if they run into a normal protein, they bend it to match the prion.
Is that almost kind of like saying it's an enzyme in that situation?
All enzymes are proteins.
Right.
Although I believe enzymes usually have to consume energy to do the thing that they're doing.
Oh, and they don't need that.
I don't think so. I think that this is just it bends to match the shape. And it's not like it's uncommon for proteins to interact. A lot of your proteins, what they do is they just here's the first one, and the second one sort of latches onto it, and the third one latches onto that the same way.
Right.
So they're trying to do something like that, only you've got this bent one, and then it bends all the other ones. Now, this also means that usually these are things that develop slowly. So,
Yeah.
I forget where it is. It's there's some place it's near Australia. I think it's somewhere in the South Pacific. You have this tradition where when somebody dies, the family eats their brain to keep their knowledge or something like that.
Right.
And, this is a thing that they've done for hundreds of years. And they have there a disease, and I think that they've stopped the cannibalism, or at least are supposed to have stopped the cannibalism. But they have this disease there, and it's long been recognized there. It's a thing that they know about, not why, but they know that it exists, and they have a name for it. It's called Kuru.
Okay.
And Kuru is a brain disease, which is presumably from eating brains. So this guy, your great-grandfather, he dies, you eat his brain. He's had these proteins in his brain. They get into your digestive system and somehow get up to your brain. They start misfolding the proteins in your brain, and then eventually you get Kuru too. Now, the interesting thing about Kuru, where I'm going with this, is supposedly there was at least one instance where there was a 40-year gap between when the brain was eaten and when the person who ate the brain developed Kuru. So sometimes these things are really slow.
Yeah, that's a pretty big gap in terms of an effect, or in terms of showing symptoms of an infection or something wrong.
Yeah. And the good part about that is that a fair number of your people who get a prion disease may die of other causes just naturally before it ever becomes a problem.
Ooh.
The downside of that is that if you've got this disease for 40 years before it becomes symptomatic, you can potentially spread that a lot.
Right.
Now, prion diseases don't usually spread like bacterial viral diseases, in that there's no DNA there, there's no... I would say that there's no goal to the extent that you can anthropomorphize them as having goals. A virus wants to make more viruses.
Right.
A prion doesn't really want to make more prions, it just makes more prions. So a virus has this set of genes that will cause cells to do certain things and make it more likely to spread the virus. Prion doesn't have that. Prion just makes more prions, and if it runs into things, it makes them into prions, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. So they don't usually spread like those other things. And with Kuru, at least, the only way you're going to get it is by eating the guy's brain or nerves.
Right.
But are there other things that could be spread other ways? People don't entirely know. And one of the concerns with the mad cow disease, one of the ideas with how it started, is that we were grinding up dead parts of cows and feeding them to cows.
Right.
And some of those were brains, and so they eat the brains, they get the prion that's had longer to build up, starts building up in them, their brains get fed to something, and it just sort of spirals out of control.
Okay. That makes me a little more worried about just going outside now.
Well, I wouldn't be too worried about prions because I think that for the most part they're very difficult to spread.
Right.
That said, we don't know how many of them there are, and all the ones that I'm aware of have been brain things, but strictly speaking, I don't know that there's a reason that you couldn't have them elsewhere. And it's possible that there are other diseases that we don't know what causes them that are caused by prions, and we just never knew about it.
And so it sounds like there's a lot of research in that area to be done.
But a big part of the problem is, we have the human genome mapped, but figuring out how to get from that to a map or even a guide to your genes are going to correspond mostly to a protein.
Right.
And figuring out how to get from here's this gene to here's this protein and here's what it does. We are very far from that. That's going to take probably at least 50 years, I'd guess more.
Okay.
We did the easy part. The sequencing the human genome was actually the easier part than figuring out what all these proteins are and how they're made. It's tricky. And the problem with that, where prions come in, is until we know consistently how to go from gene to protein, we don't know all the proteins that are in there,
Right.
and we don't know what shape they're supposed to be. So you could have a prion in there, and we don't know what it's supposed to look like, so we don't know that it's a prion.
Ooh.
Nobody's ever, as far as I know, even started trying to say, okay, here's one individual cell, here's every protein that's in it. And I'm not sure you could do that. Probably the best way to do that would be to just try to build them up from the genes, but it's more complicated than that, because you're going to have this gene that's going to make this big protein, but then you're also going to have this other gene that makes this other protein, and this other protein comes in and cuts this first protein in half, and one part gets thrown away and eaten up by the cell,
Right.
and the other part goes off and does something. Well, just looking at the original gene, you don't know that. So we're very far from having the cell all figured out, and without that, we don't know if there's these things lurking in there that
Shouldn't be there.
right.
All right.
That said, I think that you've got more to fear from bacterial and viral infections than prions. Prions are neat, though. They're definitely, in my opinion, closer to not alive than alive, but they do stuff.
Okay. All right. That's actually really cool.
I think they are kind of cool, but also don't want to mess with them. One of the other problems with them is that they are really difficult to clean.
Yeah, that was another thing. Yeah.
You have to. I think they've got to be in an autoclave for like 6-8 hours. It's much longer than normal decontamination.
Really?
Yeah, no, they are very tough to get rid of. The two ways to do it are to cook the heck out of them, which would be the autoclave,
Right.
or use some sort of protein denaturer. And protein denaturers are super toxic because, those are important.
I mean, we're not made of those
Not
completely.
entirely,
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a couple of those. So your options are really super toxic stuff or just cooking the heck out of them.
It's like kill it with fire.
Pretty much, yeah. I think there's usually not actually fire involved, but it's very high temperatures and I believe very high pressure.
Okay.
Yeah, which will kill more things than fire, actually.
All right. Well, I think with that interesting tidbit of information on prions, I think we're going to go ahead and end this episode.
Okay.
Again, want to thank Andrew for being here.
No problem.
And again, this was Alpha Episode 3 of The Science Show with Mo, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys next time.